The sun's rays filtered through Kronos City's massive glass dome, refracting into 1,000 colors across the polished marble of the central axis. Dr. Aryan Solstice paused on the walkway, momentarily lost in the beauty of the light dance. It was easy to forget, in moments like these, the weight of responsibility resting on her shoulders. She took a deep breath and continued her brisk walk toward the orbital Kronos station, her long white coat fluttering behind her. Kronos City stood as humanity's final bastion in the 35th century, a marvel of architecture and technological achievement. The massive protective dome that encircled the city gleamed like a jewel against the harsh landscape outside, where time itself had become unstable after centuries of manipulation. Within these walls, the time architects maintained the delicate balance of the temporal flow, ensuring that humanity could continue its existence without falling prey to the temporal catastrophes that had wiped out so many other settlements. "Good morning, Architect Solstice," called a young woman who hurried past, her arms full of scrolling temporal diagrams. "The Council is waiting for your final report on the Chronon Seed." Aryan nodded, forcing a smile. "Thank you. I'm on my way now." The Chronon Seed, her greatest achievement and, potentially, her last act as a time architect. After today, she would step away from her role, leaving behind the pressures and politics that had consumed her life for the past decade. The project had taken everything from her: her time, her energy, her relationships. It was time to move on. As she approached the towering structure of the orbital chronostation, the massive timepiece at its center pulsed with blue energy. The station was the nexus of all temporal signals sent throughout the solar system, maintaining the delicate rhythm of time itself. It was here that Aryan would activate her final creation. "Dr. Solstice," Jonas Lyra, her research assistant, came hurrying toward her, his face flushed with excitement. "I've finalized the calibration protocols. We're ready for the initiation sequence whenever you give the word." Jonas had been with her throughout the development of the Chronon Seed, his brilliance and dedication making him an invaluable ally. Despite being officially assigned to her by the Council, his loyalty had shifted fully to Aryan and her vision over the years. "Thank you, Jonas," she said, placing a hand briefly on his shoulder. "I'll need to review the final data once more before the ceremony. Has Judge Krona arrived yet?" "Not yet, but the other council members are gathering in the observation chamber." Jonas hesitated, lowering his voice. "Are you sure about this, Aryan? Once we activate the seed, there's no going back." Aryan's jaw tightened. "The council has approved the project. All simulations indicate success." "I know, but—" Jonas glanced around, ensuring they wouldn't be overheard. "Something feels wrong. The temporal fluctuations we've been observing throughout the city, they've increased by 17% since yesterday." This wasn't news Aryan wanted to hear, especially not today. "It's within acceptable parameters," she insisted, though uncertainty gnawed at her. "The Chronon Seed will stabilize everything once it's active." Jonas looked unconvinced, but nodded anyway. "I've prepared the central chamber. You can review the final data there." The central chamber was a circular room at the heart of the station, where screens displayed real-time temporal data from across the solar system. As Aryan sat at the main console, she couldn't shake the feeling that Jonas might be right. The fluctuations were concerning, even if they were technically within the safe range established by the Council. She pulled up the final simulation data, watching as the virtual Chronon Seed pulsed with energy, sending out waves of temporal stabilization across the model of their solar system. According to every calculation, the seed would revolutionize their approach to time architecture, creating a self-sustaining temporal field that would no longer require constant adjustments and interventions. It was the culmination of everything she had learned from her mentor, Professor Valen Marcos. His brilliance had shaped the field of temporal physics, and his sudden death 20 years ago in what was officially termed a temporal incident had left a void in the scientific community that Arian had spent her career trying to fill. As she reviewed the data, a notification appeared on her screen. A secured archive file had been transferred to her personal database. Curious. She opened it to find a collection of documents, journal entries, and research notes. The sender was marked only as a friend of truth. Her eyes widened as she realized what she was looking at. These were Professor Valen's private journals, documents that had supposedly been destroyed after his death. The Council had claimed they contained dangerous theories that could destabilize the temporal framework. Yet here they were, intact, and waiting for her to discover their secrets. Arian glanced at the time display. The activation ceremony would begin in 3 hours. She had time to at least scan through the material. With a quick command, she locked the chamber door and began to read. Hours later, Arian's hands trembled as she closed the final journal entry. The color had drained from her face, and a cold sweat beaded on her forehead. The truth was far worse than she could have imagined. According to Valen's journals, he had been working on a project nearly identical to the Chronon Seed, a self-sustaining temporal field generator. But his final entries revealed his discovery that such a device would inevitably create what he called a temporal singularity, a collapse in the fabric of time itself. The very project that had supposedly killed him had been his attempt to prevent the Council from pursuing this technology. Valen had discovered that the Council of Aeons, led by Judge Krona, was fully aware of the catastrophic risks, but had chosen to proceed anyway, believing they could control the outcome. When Valen threatened to go public with his findings, he was silenced, his death orchestrated to look like an accident during a failed experiment. "They're using me," Arian whispered to herself, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "They're using me to finish what Valen refused to do." A knock at the door jolted her from her thoughts. "Architect Solstice," Jonas called. "The council members have arrived. They're asking for you." Arian quickly closed the files, encrypting them with her personal code. "I'll be right there," she called, struggling to keep her voice steady. She needed time to think, to verify Valen's claims. But time was the one thing she didn't have. In less than 2 hours, she was scheduled to activate the Chronon Seed in a public ceremony that would be broadcast throughout the city. If Valen was right, she would be initiating a catastrophe that could destroy not just Kronos, but potentially unravel time itself across the planet. As she exited the chamber, Arian's mind raced. She couldn't simply refuse to proceed without evidence. The council would immediately remove her and appoint someone else to complete the activation. She needed allies, information, and most importantly, a plan. Jonas was waiting for her, concern evident in his eyes. "Arian, you look like you've seen a ghost. Is everything all right?" She hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. Jonas had always been loyal, but he was also an official appointee of the council. Could she trust him with this? "I need your help," she said finally, keeping her voice low. "But what I'm about to ask you to do could put your career, perhaps even your life, at risk. I would understand if you refused." Jonas's expression grew serious. "What's going on?" "Not here." Arian glanced around the corridor. "Meet me in the archive room in 30 minutes. I'll say I need to check some historical data before the ceremony." "The archive room is monitored," Jonas reminded her. "Not the deep storage section. No one goes there anymore, not since everything was digitized." Jonas nodded, though confusion and concern were evident on his face. 30 minutes. Arian made her way to the observation chamber, where the council members had gathered. The room was a marvel of classical architecture, blended with futuristic technology. Marble columns supporting a domed ceiling, where holographic displays showed the temporal flow throughout the solar system. Judge Krona stood at the center, her tall, imposing figure draped in the traditional robes of the Council of Aeons. Her silver hair was pulled back severely from her face, highlighting her sharp features and piercing gray eyes. "Architect Solstice," Krona said, her voice carrying the weight of authority that had ruled Kronos for decades. "We were beginning to wonder if you had forgotten our meeting." "My apologies, Judge Krona," Arian replied, offering a respectful bow. "I was finalizing the activation sequences." "Excellent." A thin smile crossed Krona's face. "Today marks a historic moment for Kronos, and for you, Architect. The Chronon Seed will ensure our dominion over time for generations to come." The word dominion sent a chill down Arian's spine. It was exactly the kind of thinking that Valen had warned against in his journals. The dangerous belief that time was something to be conquered rather than preserved. "The preparations are complete," Arian said, keeping her tone neutral. "We will be ready for activation at the scheduled time." "Perfect." Krona turned to address the other council members. "As you know, the Chronon Seed represents the culmination of decades of research. Once activated, it will create a self-sustaining temporal field that will protect Kronos from any further temporal disturbances. No more will we be subject to the whims of cosmic fluctuations." The council members nodded in approval, their faces reflecting the satisfaction of those who believe themselves to be on the verge of ultimate control. "If you'll excuse me," Arian said, "there are still some historical data points I need to verify before the ceremony." Krona waved a dismissive hand. "By all means. We wouldn't want any unexpected complications." Something in the way Krona emphasized those last words made Arian wonder if the judge suspected something. She kept her expression neutral as she bowed again and exited the chamber. The archive room was located in the lower levels of the station, a vast repository of physical records dating back to the founding of Kronos. While most of the information had been digitized, the original documents were preserved for historical significance. Jonas was waiting for her in the deep storage section, surrounded by dust-covered shelves filled with ancient tomes and data crystals from earlier eras. "All right," he said as soon as she entered. "What's going on, Arian? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Not a ghost," she replied, pulling out her personal data tablet. "A warning from the past." She showed him Valen's journals, explaining what she had discovered. Jonas's face grew increasingly pale as he absorbed the implications. "This can't be right," he whispered. "The council wouldn't knowingly risk a temporal collapse. The consequences would be—" "Catastrophic," Arian finished. "But Valen's equations are sound. I've reviewed them myself. The Chronon Seed, as designed, will create a temporal singularity. It might take months, even years, but it's inevitable." Jonas ran a hand through his hair, his expression shifting from disbelief to horror. "What do we do? The ceremony is in less than 2 hours. First, we need more evidence. Valen mentions temporal disturbances as an early warning sign of the singularity forming. The fluctuations you noticed, we need to analyze them more thoroughly. I have the data on my terminal, but accessing it without triggering an alert will be difficult. Can you create a diversion in the monitoring systems, something that would draw attention elsewhere while we access the data?" Jonas thought for a moment. "The maintenance protocols are scheduled for a test run tomorrow. I could trigger them early, claim it was an automatic update." "Do it," Arian said. "Meanwhile, I need to find out who sent me these journals. Someone in the council must be aware of the truth." Jonas nodded. "There's an Elder Corraine who joined the council recently. He was a student of Valen's, like you. If anyone would have access to these journals." "Corraine," Arian nodded. "I've met him once or twice. He always seemed thoughtful, less dogmatic than the others." "He'll be at the ceremony. If you could speak with him beforehand." "I'll find a way." Arian squeezed Jonas's shoulder. "Thank you for believing me. I know this isn't what you signed up for." A grim smile crossed Jonas's face. I signed up to protect the temporal flow. If the Council is willingly endangering it, then my loyalty isn't to them. With a plan in motion, they split up. Jonas headed to his terminal to create the diversion, while Arian made her way back toward the upper levels, hoping to intercept Elder Karain before the ceremony. As she passed through the main concourse of the station, Arian noticed something disturbing. A small crowd had gathered around a young man who appeared to be frozen in mid-stride, his expression locked in a moment of surprise. Around him, time flowed normally, but he remained trapped in his own temporal bubble. What happened? Arian asked, pushing through the onlookers. It just happened suddenly, a woman explained. 1 minute he was walking, the next, it's the third incident this week. Temporal freezes were rare, but not unheard of in Kronos. Usually, they were isolated incidents, quickly contained by the time architects. But 3 in 1 week was unprecedented. As Arian studied the frozen man, her communication device chimed. It was Jonas. Arian. His voice was urgent. I've analyzed the fluctuation data. It's worse than we thought. The disturbances aren't just increasing, they're forming a pattern. Concentrated pulses, all centered around the station. The Chronon Seed prototype, Arian realized. Even in its dormant state, it's affecting the temporal field. Exactly. And there's more. I checked the historical records against Valen's timeline. The disturbances he recorded before his death match what we're seeing now. But on a smaller scale. Arian's blood ran cold. Which means his predictions are correct. If we activate the seed. We need to stop the ceremony, Jonas said. It won't be that simple. Arian watched as temporal enforcement officers arrived to contain the frozen man, establishing a quarantine field around him. The Council has invested too much in this project. They won't abandon it without irrefutable proof. Then we need to get that proof. I'm sending you the data now. Arian's tablet chimed as the files arrived. I'll review these and try to find Elder Karain. Meet me at the ceremony chamber in 1 hour. And Jonas, be careful. If the Council suspects what we're doing. I know, you too. The connection ended, and Arian hurried toward the Council chambers, hoping to find Elder Karain before it was too late. The corridors of the upper levels were bustling with activity as staff prepared for the ceremony. Banners bearing the symbol of the Council of Aeons, an hourglass encircled by stars, hung from the vaulted ceilings. And the air was charged with anticipation. Arian spotted Elder Karain emerging from one of the side chambers, his slight frame and thoughtful expression distinguishing him from the other council members. He was younger than most elders, his hair only beginning to show traces of gray at the temples. Elder Karain, Arian called, approaching him with a respectful bow. Might I have a moment of your time before the ceremony? Karain turned, his eyes showing a flash of recognition. Architect Solstice, of course. I was hoping to speak with you as well. They stepped into an empty alcove, away from the flow of passing staff. I'll be direct, Elder, Arian said, keeping her voice low. I've received some concerning information about the Chronon Seed project, specifically about potential risks that weren't included in the official reports. Karain's expression remained neutral, but his eyes sharpened with interest. What kind of risks? The kind that Professor Valen warned about 20 years ago. The kind that might have led to his death. A long moment of silence stretched between them. Finally, Karain spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. You've read his journals. Yes, someone sent them to me this morning. Was it you? Karain glanced around, ensuring they weren't being observed. Not directly, but I made sure they found their way to you. I've been watching your work, Architect Solstice. You have your mentor's brilliance and his integrity. I needed to be sure you would see the truth before it was too late. Then it's true. The Chronon Seed will create a temporal singularity? Not just any singularity. what Valen called a temporal knot, a paradox in the fabric of time that grows more complex and unstable with each attempt to resolve it. Judge Krona believes it can be contained, used as a power source for even greater control over the temporal flow. "That's insane," Arian hissed. "A temporal knot would eventually collapse the entire temporal field. No containment system could hold it indefinitely." "I know." So did Valen. When he threatened to expose the truth, Krona ordered his project sabotaged. The accident that killed him was no accident at all. Arian felt sick. The mentor she had idolized, whose work she had continued, had been murdered to prevent him from stopping exactly what she was about to do. "We need to stop the ceremony," she said. "It won't be that simple," Corain warned. "Krona has invested too much in this project. If you refuse to proceed, she'll simply have you removed and appoint someone else to complete the activation." "Then what do we do?" Corain pulled a small device from his pocket, a temporal key, used to access the most secure areas of the station. "This will give you access to the central control matrix. The Chronon seed can't be simply deactivated. Its energy must be dispersed safely. This key will allow you to initiate the emergency protocol that Valen designed before his death." Valen prepared for this? He knew the Council wouldn't abandon the project, even after his warnings. So he created a fail-safe, a way to neutralize the seed if it was ever constructed. Arian took the key, weighing it in her palm. "Why haven't you used this yourself?" A sad smile crossed Corain's face. "The protocol requires a Time Architect's authorization, specifically, the architect who designed the seed. Only you can activate it." "And what about you? Once Krona realizes what's happened?" "Don't worry about me. I've been preparing for this day for 20 years. But you need to be careful. Architect Solstice. Krona has eyes everywhere." As if summoned by his words, a group of council guards appeared at the end of the corridor, led by a stern-faced officer. "Elder Corain," the officer called. "Judge Krona requests your presence immediately." Corain nodded calmly. "Of course." He turned back to Arian, speaking quickly and quietly. "Find Jonas. The ceremony begins in 1 hour. You'll have one chance when you initialize the activation sequence to redirect the energy flow. Don't hesitate, and trust no one except Jonas." With that, he straightened his robes and walked toward the waiting guards, his posture betraying nothing of their conversation. Arian slipped the temporal key into her pocket and headed in the opposite direction. Her mind racing. She needed to find Jonas and develop a plan before the ceremony began. The ceremony chamber was a vast circular space at the heart of the station, directly beneath the massive timepiece that pulsed with blue energy. At its center stood a pedestal where the Chronon seed would be placed for activation, a small, crystalline sphere that belied its tremendous potential power. Council members and distinguished citizens were already beginning to gather, their excited murmurs filling the space with a low hum of anticipation. Arian scanned the crowd, looking for Jonas, but couldn't spot him among the hundreds of attendees. Her communication device chimed with a message. "Security alert. Meet at backup location B." It was Jonas's code for trouble. Something had gone wrong. Backup location B was a maintenance tunnel that ran beneath the ceremony chamber, providing access to the central systems. Arian made her way discreetly to a service entrance, using her architect's credentials to bypass the security locks. The tunnel beyond was dimly lit, the hum of machinery providing cover for any sounds of movement. She found Jonas waiting at a junction, his face tense with worry. "What happened?" she asked. "Krona knows," he said, his voice tight. "I was accessing the fluctuation data when I intercepted a security communication. They're looking for Elder Corain's accomplice, someone who received classified documents this morning." "How much time do we have?" "Not much. They haven't identified you yet, but it won't take them long to trace the data transfer." Arian showed him the temporal key. "Corain gave me this. It will allow us to access the central matrix and activate Valen's failsafe protocol. Jonas examined the key. This is high-level clearance. With this, we could access the seed directly, before the ceremony even begins. No, Arian shook her head. The chamber is already filling with people. If we try to tamper with the seed now, security will stop us before we can complete the protocol. We need to wait until the ceremony, when I'll have legitimate access to the initialization systems. That's cutting it dangerously close. Arian, once the activation sequence begins, it's our only chance. I'll initialize the sequence as expected, but instead of completing the standard protocol, I'll activate Valen's failsafe. The energy will be dispersed safely, instead of forming the singularity. Jonas didn't look convinced, but he nodded. What do you need me to do? Create a diversion at the secondary control station. Make it look like a system malfunction. Something that will draw security's attention without raising alarms about sabotage. I can do that. But Arian, what about after? Once Krona realizes what you've done. Arian's expression hardened. One problem at a time. First, we prevent a temporal catastrophe. Then we worry about Krona. They finalized their plan quickly, aware that time was running short. Jonas would create the diversion 5 minutes into the ceremony, just as Arian began the initialization sequence. That would give her the window she needed to access the central matrix and activate Valen's failsafe. As they prepared to part ways, Jonas hesitated. Arian, there's something else you should know. The temporal disturbances, they're accelerating. 3 more freezes have been reported across the city in the last hour. That's impossible. The pattern shouldn't escalate that quickly unless the seed is already affecting the temporal field more than we anticipated, Jonas finished. Whatever we're going to do, we need to do it fast. With a final nod of understanding, they separated, Jonas heading to the secondary control station, while Arian made her way back to the ceremony chamber, her heart pounding with the weight of what lay ahead. The chamber was now filled to capacity, the excited murmurs of the crowd creating a continuous backdrop of sound. Arian took her position at the main control console, the chronon seed gleaming on its pedestal before her. Despite everything she now knew, she couldn't help but feel a surge of pride in the creation itself, a marvel of temporal engineering that represented years of dedicated work. Judge Krona stood at the raised platform above the pedestal, her imposing figure drawing all eyes as she raised her hands for silence. Citizens of Kronos. Krona's voice carried throughout the chamber without the need for amplification, a trick of acoustics built into the very architecture of the space. Today marks a new chapter in our mastery of time itself. For too long, we have been subject to the unpredictable fluctuations of the temporal flow, forced to maintain constant vigilance against disturbances that threaten our very existence. She gestured toward the chronon seed. But today, thanks to the brilliant work of Architect Solstice, we take the next step in our evolution. The chronon seed will create a self-sustaining temporal field that will protect Kronos for generations to come, ensuring our continued dominion over the forces that once threatened to destroy us. The crowd applauded, their faces alight with hope and excitement. Arian felt a pang of guilt for what she was about to do, not because it was wrong, but because she would be shattering their illusion of security. Architect Solstice, Krona turned to her. You may begin the initialization sequence. Arian nodded, turning to the control console. Her fingers moved over the familiar interface, beginning the sequence that would bring the chronon seed to life. On the screens above, the temporal data stream showed the current state of the field, already disturbed by the mere presence of the dormant seed. She glanced at the time display. Jonas should be initiating the diversion any moment now. As if on cue, alarms blared from the secondary control station. Security officers moved quickly toward the disturbance, their attention drawn away from the main console. A minor system fluctuation, Arian announced calmly. Nothing to be concerned about. The initialization sequence continues as planned. Krona frowned but nodded, Her attention focused on the chronon seed, which had begun to glow with an inner light as the energy flow increased. This was her chance. With swift, practiced movements, Arian inserted Karane's temporal key into a secondary port on the console, a port that few would recognize as anything but a standard diagnostic connection. The interface changed subtly, revealing a hidden protocol buried deep within the system architecture. Valen's failsafe. The text was in his distinctive coding style, elegant and precise. Arian felt a surge of emotion at this final connection to her mentor. She began the redirect, her fingers flying over the controls as she rerouted the energy flow away from the standard initialization pattern and into Valen's dispersal protocol. The chronon seed's glow changed imperceptibly, from a steady blue to a slightly more violet hue. Only someone intimately familiar with the design would notice the difference. "Something's wrong," a technician called from one of the monitoring stations. "The energy pattern is deviating from the projection." Krona's head snapped toward Arian, her eyes narrowing with sudden suspicion. "Architect Solstice, what is happening?" "A standard calibration adjustment," Arian replied, not looking up from her work. "The field requires precision balancing during initialization." But it was too late. Krona had seen the temporal key, recognized it for what it was. "Security!" she called sharply. "Detain Architect Solstice immediately. She's sabotaging the project." Guards moved toward Arian, but she had already completed the critical portion of the redirect. The chronon seed now pulsed with violet light, the energy flowing along Valen's carefully designed dispersal pattern, rather than forming the singularity that Krona had intended. "You don't understand what you're doing, Krona," Arian said, standing tall as the guards surrounded her. The seed would have created a temporal knot, just as Valen warned 20 years ago. "You knew the risks and proceeded anyway." Krona's face contorted with rage. "I knew the potential, you fool! The knot would have given us unprecedented power over the temporal flow. We could have reshaped reality itself." "At what cost?" Arian demanded. "The collapse would have destroyed not just Kronos, but potentially unraveled time across the entire planet. Millions would have died, just as they did in the catastrophes that led to the founding of Kronos in the first place." The crowd had fallen silent, watching the confrontation with confusion and growing alarm. Many had begun to back toward the exits, sensing that something had gone terribly wrong. "Deactivate the dispersal protocol," Krona ordered, her voice cold with fury. "Now!" "It's too late," Arian said. "The process can't be stopped once it's begun." But even as she spoke, something unexpected happened. The chronon seed's violet glow deepened to a dark purple, then began to pulse erratically. The temporal displays showed sudden, violent fluctuations across the field. "What's happening?" Krona demanded. Arian turned back to the console, her heart racing as she analyzed the data. "The field is destabilizing. Something's interfering with the dispersal pattern." A new alert appeared on the screen, an unauthorized access to the main temporal matrix. Someone was attempting to override Valen's protocol. "Jonas," Arian whispered in horror. But it couldn't be. Jonas was supposed to be creating the diversion, unless... Her eyes found him across the chamber, being escorted in by security guards, his face bruised and his expression grim. He had been caught, which meant the diversion had failed. So who was accessing the matrix? The answer came in the form of a triumphant smile from Krona. "Did you really think I wouldn't have my own contingency plans, Architect? The temporal knot will form as intended." The chronon seed's erratic pulsing suddenly stabilized, but instead of returning to its blue glow, it darkened to an ominous black, shot through with streaks of violet. Above the pedestal, the air began to shimmer and distort. "You've doomed us all," Arian said, watching in horror as the temporal displays showed massive disturbances rippling outward from the station. Valen's protocol was the only safe way to disperse the energy. Your override has created instability in the very fabric of time. The distortion above the pedestal expanded, forming a swirling vortex of darkness, the beginning of the temporal knot that Valen had warned about. Unlike a standard singularity, the knot didn't pull matter inward. Instead, it twisted the flow of time around it, creating a paradoxical space where cause and effect became meaningless. Panic erupted in the chamber as the effects of the knot became immediately apparent. Some attendees found themselves moving in slow motion, while others accelerated to blur. In one corner, a group of people began to age rapidly, their bodies withering before the horrified eyes of the crowd. "Evacuate the chamber!" Arian shouted, breaking free from the guards in the confusion. "Everyone out! Now!" She fought her way to the console, desperately trying to stabilize the temporal field, but the damage was done. The knot had formed, and it was growing more complex with each passing second. Through the chaos, she spotted Elder Karain pushing through the crowd toward her, his face set with determination. Beside him was Jonas, who had apparently escaped his captors in the confusion. "We need to activate the containment field," Karain shouted over the din. "It won't stop the knot, but it might slow its growth long enough for us to find a solution." "The controls are locked," Arian called back, gesturing to the console where Krona's override was still in effect. "We need administrative access." "I can help with that." Jonas joined them at the console, pulling a small device from his pocket, a council security bypass that he must have acquired during his time working with the Temporal Enforcement Division. As Jonas worked to override the locks, Arian spotted Krona making her way toward an emergency exit, abandoning the chaos she had created. "She's running," Arian said, a cold anger settling in her chest. "Let her go," Karain advised. "Stopping the knot is more important than justice at the moment." "Got it," Jonas exclaimed as the console unlocked, giving them full access to the station's systems. "Containment protocols are now available." Arian activated the temporal containment field, a last resort measure designed to isolate catastrophic temporal events. A shimmering barrier formed around the knot, temporarily limiting its influence to the central portion of the chamber. "This won't hold for long," she warned, watching as the knot continued to grow and twist within the containment field. "The complexity is increasing exponentially." "We need to disperse the energy," Karain said, "not contain it." "Valen's protocol was our best chance for that," Arian replied. "With Krona's override, the pattern is corrupted." "Then we need a new protocol," Jonas suggested. "Something that can adapt to the current state of the knot." Arian stared at the swirling darkness, her mind racing through possibilities. The knot was growing more complex with each attempt to control it. That was its nature. But what if, instead of fighting that complexity, they embraced it? "We need to reverse the approach," she said slowly, the idea forming as she spoke. "Instead of trying to disperse the energy, we need to collapse the knot into a controlled implosion, a temporal reset of this specific region of space-time." "That's never been done before," Karain warned. "The risks are less than doing nothing," Arian finished. "The knot will continue to grow until it engulfs the entire city. Then the planet. We don't have a choice." Without waiting for further discussion, she began to reprogram the containment field, inverting its polarity to create an implosion effect rather than a barrier. The mathematics were complex, requiring her to adapt equations on the fly. But her years of training as a time architect had prepared her for this moment. "Jonas, I need you to stabilize the outer perimeter of the field," she instructed. "Karain, monitor the knot's complexity. If it exceeds level 9, we'll need to accelerate the process." They worked frantically, the chaos around them fading into the background as they focused on the task at hand. The remaining attendees had mostly evacuated, leaving only the three of them and a handful of brave security officers who had stayed to help. "Complexity level 8, Karain reported, his voice tense. 8.5. It's accelerating." "Perimeter stabilized," Jonas called. "But I don't know how long it will hold." Arian finished her calculations, her fingers flying over the interface as she programmed the final sequence. On my mark, activate the implosion field. 3, 2, 1, mark. Jonas triggered the sequence, and the containment field began to contract, forcing the knot to collapse in on itself. The darkness at the center intensified, the temporal distortions becoming more pronounced as the field compressed. Complexity level 9, Karain warned. 9.5. Hold the perimeter, Arian ordered, making rapid adjustments to compensate for the increasing complexity. We need to maintain the compression until the reset point. The air in the chamber crackled with energy, the very fabric of reality straining under the pressure of the implosion. Arian felt time stretching and compressing around her, moments extending into what felt like hours, then snapping back to mere seconds. Complexity level 10, Karain shouted, his voice distorted by the temporal fluctuations. We're approaching critical threshold! This was the moment of truth. If the implosion succeeded, the knot would collapse into a controlled reset of the local temporal field. If it failed, the resulting explosion of temporal energy would likely destroy the entire station, and perhaps beyond. Almost there, Arian said through gritted teeth, watching as the field contracted to a fraction of its original size. The darkness at the center had become so intense that it seemed to absorb light itself. Just a few more seconds. With a sudden flash of blinding light, the knot imploded, releasing a shockwave of temporal energy that swept through the chamber. Arian felt herself flung backward, time stretching around her like elastic, then snapping into a new configuration. When her vision cleared, the pedestal stood empty. The chronon seed was gone, collapsed along with the knot into the temporal reset. In its place was a small area of what Arian recognized as time out of sync, a portion of space where time flowed differently than its surroundings, creating a visible distortion in the air. We did it, Jonas said weakly, pulling himself to his feet. The knot is gone. Not gone, Arian corrected, approaching the distortion cautiously. Reset. This area will remain out of sync for decades, perhaps centuries, but it's contained, no longer growing or threatening the city. Karain joined them, his robe singed by the temporal energy, but otherwise unharmed. You've saved Kronos, Architect Solstice, but I fear the Council will not see it that way. As if summoned by his words, the chamber doors burst open, and a squad of temporal enforcement officers entered, led by one of Kronos' loyal commanders. Architect Arian Solstice, the commander announced formally. By order of the Council of Aeons, you are hereby stripped of your title and authority. You are charged with sabotage, endangerment of the city, and treason against the temporal order. Arian straightened, facing the officers with dignity. I accept the charges, Commander, but I request the right to present evidence at my trial, evidence that will reveal the true nature of the Chronon Seed project and the Council's willful disregard for the safety of Kronos. The commander hesitated, clearly unprepared for this response. That will be for the Council to decide. The Council may find itself facing its own charges, Karain interjected, stepping forward. As a senior elder, I invoke the right of temporal review, a full investigation into the events leading to this catastrophe, including Judge Krona's actions and the suppression of Professor Valen's warnings. The commander looked uncertain, caught between conflicting authorities. Finally, he nodded stiffly. The charges stand, but the review is acknowledged. Architect Solstice will remain in custody until the review is complete. As the officers approached to escort her away, Arian turned to Jonas. The evidence is in my personal archive. Valen's journals, the fluctuation data, everything you need to prove what really happened. Jonas nodded, determination in his eyes. I'll make sure the truth comes to light. Arian, I promise. With dignity, Arian allowed herself to be led from the chamber, her mind already turning to the battles ahead. She had saved Kronos from immediate destruction, But the greater fight, the fight for truth, and a new approach to temporal science, was just beginning. In the days that followed, Chronos City was gripped by uncertainty and fear. News of the ceremony incident, as it came to be known, spread rapidly, along with rumors of council corruption and hidden dangers in the temporal field. The time out-of-sync area in the ceremony chamber was cordoned off, a visible reminder of how close the city had come to disaster. Temporal disturbances continued across Chronos, though they gradually diminished in frequency and severity as the effects of the collapsed knot stabilized. Arian remained in custody, isolated from the events unfolding outside. But reports reached her through Karain, who visited regularly as part of the review process. Judge Krona had disappeared, fleeing the city before she could be questioned about her role in the catastrophe. Several other council members had resigned in disgrace when Valen's journals became public. Their complicity in his death and the suppression of his warnings impossible to deny. The council is being restructured, Karain informed Arian during one of his visits. A new system of checks and balances is being implemented, with greater transparency and shared authority. And what of the Chronon technology? Arian asked. Abandoned, at least in its current form. Your analysis of the flaws in the design has convinced even the most stubborn advocates that the risks are too great. Good. Arian nodded, satisfied that at least some positive change had emerged from the disaster. And Jonas? How is he? A smile crossed Karain's face. Thriving, actually. He's been appointed to lead a new research initiative, the Decentralized Temporal Ecosystem Project. It's based on some of your early work, combined with principles from Valen's last papers. The idea is to create a more natural, adaptive approach to temporal management, rather than the rigid control the Council preferred. Arian felt a surge of pride at this news. He'll do well. He has the vision to see beyond the old ways of thinking. As do you, Karain said, his expression growing serious. Which brings me to the purpose of my visit. The review is complete, and the findings are mixed. You've been exonerated of the treason charges, and your actions are acknowledged to have saved the city from a temporal catastrophe. But the Council, even in its restructured form, cannot publicly condone the destruction of a project that consumed so many resources and years of work. There must be consequences, for appearance's sake if nothing else. Arian nodded, unsurprised. What's the verdict then? Exile, Karain said simply. You will be stripped of your title as Time Architect and required to leave Chronos. However, he raised a hand as Arian began to speak. This is largely a formality. You'll be provided with resources and a new identity. After a suitable period, arrangements could be made for your return, if you wished it. Arian considered this for a long moment. The prospect of leaving Chronos, the only home she had ever known, was daunting. But perhaps it was also an opportunity, a chance to start fresh, away from the politics and pressures that had dominated her life. I think, she said slowly, that exile might be exactly what I need. A new beginning, somewhere beyond the shadow of the Chronon seed and all it represents. Karain studied her face. You're not surprised by the verdict. No, Arian admitted. I've been considering my future. Even if I were fully exonerated, I'm not sure there's a place for me in Chronos anymore. At least, not the place I once occupied. And what will you do? Where will you go? A small smile crossed Arian's face. There are communities beyond the dome, you know, places where people live in harmony with the natural flow of time, rather than trying to control it. Perhaps I could learn from them, and perhaps they could benefit from some of what I know. The time out-of-sync zones are dangerous, Karain warned. The temporal fluctuations outside the dome are part of the natural order, Arian finished. Something we've forgotten in our quest for perfect control. Maybe it's time I remembered how to live with uncertainty, rather than trying to eliminate it. 3 months later, Arian stood at the edge of Kronos City, gazing out at the landscape beyond the dome. The official ceremony of her exile had been brief and sparsely attended, a formality to satisfy the bureaucratic requirements of the council. Jonas stood beside her, his expression a mixture of sadness and pride. "I still think this is unnecessary. Your work is needed here, especially now that we're rebuilding." "My work is done here," Arian replied gently. "You'll carry it forward better than I could. You don't have the baggage of the past weighing you down. We could work together. The Decentralized Temporal Ecosystem Project is yours to lead, Jonas. Trust yourself. You've proven your capabilities many times over." They stood in silence for a moment, watching as the airlock prepared for her departure. Beyond the dome, the landscape shimmered with temporal distortions, beautiful in their way, though dangerous to the unprepared. "Will you at least stay in contact?" Jonas asked finally. "Let us know you're safe." Arian smiled. "When I can. Communication through the time-out-of-sync zones is unpredictable, but I'll find a way." A soft chime announced that the airlock was ready. Arian gathered her few possessions, clothes, supplies, and a small data crystal containing copies of Valen's journals and her own research. Everything else she had left behind. "There's a settlement about 3 days' journey east," she said, checking her temporal stabilizer one last time. The device would protect her from the worst effects of the fluctuations, at least until she learned to navigate them naturally. Former time architects, technicians, philosophers, people who chose to leave Kronos to pursue a different relationship with time. "Your kind of people," Jonas said with a sad smile. "Perhaps," Arian embraced him briefly. "Take care of the city, Jonas, and yourself." With a final nod to the guards, Arian stepped into the airlock. As the inner door sealed behind her and the outer door prepared to open, she felt a strange mixture of trepidation and liberation. For the first time in years, perhaps for the first time in her life, she was truly free to choose her own path, unconstrained by the expectations of the council or the legacy of her mentor. The outer door slid open, revealing the wild, shimmering landscape beyond. Arian took a deep breath of the untamed air, feeling the subtle differences in how time flowed outside the dome, not the rigid, controlled flow of Kronos, but something more organic, more natural. With a straight back and steady stride, she stepped out of Kronos and into her future, leaving behind the title of Time Architect, but carrying with her the knowledge and wisdom she had gained. The Chronon Seed had been her last creation as an architect, a creation that had nearly destroyed everything, but in its failure had opened the door to new possibilities. As she walked away from the dome, Arian noticed small blue flowers growing among the rocks, temporal mimosas, blooming at the intersection of conflicting time streams. According to legend, they only appeared when the natural flow of time was healing from disruption. It was, she decided, a good omen for what lay ahead, not just for her, but for Kronos City and for humanity's relationship with time itself. The era of rigid control was ending, giving way to something new, something that embraced the complexity and uncertainty that Krona and the old council had feared so deeply. Behind her, the massive dome of Kronos gleamed in the sunlight, its chronospires reaching toward the sky like fingers grasping for control. Before her stretched the wild, unpredictable landscape of the time-out-of-sync zones, beautiful in their chaotic patterns of temporal energy. Arian smiled and continued walking, each step taking her further from her past and deeper into the new reality she had helped create. A reality where time was not a resource to be exploited, but a partner in the dance of existence. The journey ahead would be challenging, even dangerous, but for the first time in years, she felt truly alive, truly present in the moment. The Time Architect's last creation had been destruction, but from that destruction had come the possibility of rebirth, not just for Kronos, but for Arian herself. And that, she decided, was a fitting legacy after all.